On. Hey everyone, welcome to ThetaWave.
Yes, this is
We
ThetaWave.
are doing a test, so don't get too excited.
Yes, we're not starting yet. It's sad.
We're
'cause we
doing
get
our
boom,
regular
boom.
test, mic
Regular
test, make
test.
sure everything sounds
Everything's
good,
working great.
and
Potentially.
testing levels.
Testing levels. Boom, boom. Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to ThetaWave. Yes, this is ThetaWave. We are doing a test, so don't get too excited. Yes, we're not starting yet. Sad. We're doing our regular test, mic test, make sure everything sounds good. Great. And potentially testing levels. That sounds good,
Yeah, I really like it.
doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. You want to do another test, or are we thinking?
I say we
maybe.
please wait. Loading. For a 4. Error.
Error. Cannot compute.
Cannot establish connection to host.
The hive mind.
And we're back.
And we're back.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we should be fine.
Okay, sweet. Let's just go ahead.
So we're gonna switch back to our waiting screen,
All right.
and then we'll give ourselves about a minute or so,
Minute or two.
so we have a spot in when we're editing to that's easy to find that we can cut at.
Sweet.
All right, guys, we will be back.
See you guys in a second.
A few minutes. See you then.
Hello and welcome to ThetaWave Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Holland. I'm a neuroscience researcher here with my co-host, Ryan Reed. Ryan Reed is a machine learning expert and as well as a neuroscience researcher, singer, songwriter, and various other things. And so, Ryan, what have we got going on today? What are we talking about? What are we doing deep dive into?
Yeah, we got some interesting stuff going on today. We are talking about some pretty hefty topics overall, as far as just like the kind of the expanse of what they encompass. But we are going to be talking about LSTM cells. Again, for the people that tuned in last time, but we specifically are doing a little bit more of a thorough breakdown because I realized after last time that it's a hard thing to try to fit all of it into a single podcast and really let people absorb it.
Yeah.
There are underlying mechanisms that I didn't even have time to go into that kind of you almost need to understand if you're really going to understand it on its functional intimate level.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be going over specifically the gates in the LSTM cell and how those work, which are a big component of it. But we're going to specifically go over the forget gate. And the reason we're only going over the forget gate primarily is that all of the other gates work exactly the same way, just on different stages. And so,
yeah. I'll save my questions on that.
And so basically, we'll go over the forget gate. And what's nice is that I have created some animations for these different concepts, not just of the LSTM cell flow like last time, but this time I went and created some more animations for the forget gate. I also created animations for explaining certain concepts within the forget gate. And so we'll take a look at those and kind of use those to illustrate what I'm talking about while I'm talking. Nice. And then, okay, so that's the first thing we have set and planned. The next thing that we're going to talk about today is going to be BPC-157. And this, for those that don't know, is a peptide. And it's got some extraordinary properties and potential. And it's another one of those weird ones that those weird research compounds that you wonder, why hasn't this been explored in human context yet further? Yeah. It's had some human tests and trials that have been done on a small scale, but like nothing really extensive. And given it's the nature of the research and the encouraging results, you would think that it would have been adopted by somebody. And it's kind of almost like, in a sense, without giving away too much, it's almost like a peptide that does it all.
That's why it's called the healing peptide. It's not healing something specific, but multifactorial healing comes into play.
So we will be going over that in a second. Actually, we're gonna cover that, and then after that, we might have some time for a little bit of free flow conversation.
Yeah, talk about whatever.
And as always, that should be fun. That's the highlight of our time for sure. And we are going to be doing a little bit of a switch in format again, as we're trying to figure things out, like as far as timing goes, what makes sense to try to fit in one podcast, and what makes sense to kind of spread out amongst multiple weeks. So what we ended up kind of deciding on for now, unless we change it again,
who knows,
is we're going to try out doing a nootropic topic and either a machine learning topic or a neuroscience topic.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of try and condense down like the important information of the nootropics and what you need to know, and kind of do a really good job of distilling things down, because we're not trying to go over like all of the details and like
there are a lot of details
in depth, you know, and that can be stuff that will resources we can make available for you later, or that you can do on your research, you can do on your own.
Yeah.
And but what we kind of want to do is give you the down and the low of the what research has been done, where it's at, what are its properties and effects, how dangerous or safe is it, and you know, the extent to which it's been studied and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So why don't you
Very
go ahead
exciting.
and tell us about BPC-157?
Yeah, so it's a small protein fragment, so peptide made up of 15 amino acids, and it was originally found in human gastric juice. And so you can think of it as potentially part of the body's natural protective system of the gut. And so a key interesting feature is its remarkable stability. It can obviously survive in those harsh acidic environments in the stomach for over 24 hours and can resist enzymatic breakdown.
So that would suggest that it could be taken orally and survive, you know, the oral the oral digestion process, right?
Yeah, so that is for sure. And so all of this has led to a lot of excitement, obviously, around BPC-157 because of its potential long-term effect and minimal dosages. You know, it's kind of like you can have it in that 24-hour period, and it lasts even a bit longer. So you could take it like first day, wait a day, take it again, and still have a nice prolonged effect.
Yeah, that seems like it would have a lot of kind of potential relevance as almost a daily supplement. So I mean, with that said, it's kind of a good lead into like some of the interesting, you know, clinical studies that have been done on it, because there is a certain lack of human research. There's some that's been done on it, but
there's some preclinical studies.
Yeah, but there's some preclinical stuff that is, you know, interested or yielded some pretty interesting you know, results.
Some excitement there.
Yeah,
for sure.
like the and this compound, like guys, this compound does so much. Like
it's pretty crazy.
It's so multifaceted, and part of that has to do with like its mechanisms, which, you know, it interacts with the gut brain, you know, axis. So it's going to be have interactions both neurological and, you know, and directly within the body and the gut. And as we know, you know, the gut has a lot of impact, and health of the gut has a lot of impact on all the other systems. And so and part of that has to do with that neural connection there too. But you know, the animal studies that have been done actually show that it has pleiotropic effects, meaning that it is a pretty much, it's like a generalized, like healing, multifaceted compound, right? And so there's been specific animal studies that have been done that have shown each of these like different effects that this compound has. For instance, it has amazing healing potential. You know, their preclinical studies showed that it can accelerate the healing process in various tissues, including, you know, your dermal layer, and then it also has gastrointestinal regenerative, you know, effects. So it can help to, and this particular portion of its effect that there's a lot of strong evidence for, but basically a lot of these studies have shown that it can help for healing things such as ulcers and gut lesions caused by, you know, alcohol, stress, you know, even certain drugs, and can help in that regard with recuperating from surgery as well. So it has this like
yeah.
really interesting kind of healing regenerative effect on organs too, which to me is like a huge benefit for aging, because as we age, our organs and our internal systems start like slowly degrading and declining, stop functioning as well. And with that comes more, it's almost like a snowball effect of
yes. Like it seems BPC-157 activates the specific pathways that are particular for organ longevity, and this it almost makes sure that everything is safe and healthy, and it stimulates the correct environment for that to be the case. And you talked about the GI tract, and that also means it could be applicable for something like irritable bowel syndrome, like IBS, things of that nature as well.
For sure, yeah.
And
I don't know if you noticed in the research, but it was shown to have also effects not just on your organs, but on your muscles.
You get ripped.
Your tendons, ligaments.
Oh my gosh.
Your cells, like it helps with both muscle and tendon and ligament repair, and can even help with bone fractures.
Wow.
Like I'm literally naming all the different elements of the body.
Yeah, and it's just helping with all of them.
The skeletal system, the muscular system, we've got the organs and the digestive system, we've got the brain, we got
tendons, everything.
Wow. And another thing it's got going for it, and probably one of its many mechanisms, is that it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. It can reduce levels of inflammation and inflammatory markers, specifically like IL-6 and TNF alpha, and create a better environment within your body for repair. And you also mentioned something earlier about what it does with your vascular system.
Yes.
You want to hit on that?
Oh, yeah. So pretty much BPC-157 helps with and promotes angiogenesis. So angiogenesis is the formation of new blood vessels, which is crucial for getting oxygen and nutrients for injured areas in your body. And
like even creating a connection to like those those areas.
So it better establishes the information that can assimilate to tell the repair functions of the system that this is something that needs to be repaired. And then it also helps regulate the actual nutrient and oxygen environment for that repair, which is quite the incredible thing. And as it also kind of touches on neuroprotection a bit, and it protects, so pretty much BPC-157 was shown to protect nerve cells against diverse damage in animal models. And this could also be somewhat connected to angiogenesis and the fact that new blood vessels can then facilitate that nutrients as well.
Nutrient, oxygen, nitrogen flow.
Yeah, which gives the the glial cells and astrocytes the ability to facilitate that repair neuronally.
Yeah, interesting. And specifically, I remember in the neuroprotective area, it's able to help protect your brain from, at least the research suggests that it's able to help protect your brain from harsh drugs that can block like receptor functionality, and such as NSAIDs, and can also help protect your brain from injuries like stroke.
Yeah, that's huge.
And traumatic brain injury, and help it repair from traumatic brain injury. And even improve things like memory and coordination,
Yeah, it makes, when I think of strokes, it's almost like it helps the regulate the excitatory stimulation of neurons as well
Mm-hmm.
for better proper modulation depending on the context and situation, so you don't get this overabundance of depolarization. It can help that those action potentials self-regulate
And you know what's particularly in its like the kind of the subject of its repair and its effect on nerve and brain connection and whatnot. Something that I particularly found interesting was that in spinal cord models, it showed they can actually help reduce the level of tissue damage as well as improve motor function.
Oh my
spinal cord
goodness.
injuries.
Yeah.
Which is nutty because that's been one of those other things that's kind of like it's really been stumping us as far as like figuring out how to handle those kind of injuries effectively.
Yeah, so exploring how BPC-157 could interact with the spinal cord related to those injuries might shed some light for facilitating other drugs that could be more specific to that thing, which is fairly important when you think about it.
Yeah.
And it really does need to be explored.
And maybe even for things like it might even have further application for things such as scoliosis, which is something that I deal with.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And like the back pain that comes from like the inflammation of the muscles and like the nerve damage and all that kind of stuff that comes along with that. Like I would imagine that if BPC is able to help with like with hardcore direct spinal cord injuries and damage, I'd imagine it would be able to also help with things like that, which would be an interesting area of research to kind of get into, and maybe another interesting study to do on that topic. But and here's one of the reasons why I found it interesting, and actually one of the reasons why I found the peptide in general, and started zeroing in on it and deciding, if it was something that I wanted to research more and go into, possibly on the podcast. And this, I'll just go over it real fast. The BPC-157 has actually had a lot of research that it suggests that has a huge effect on the dopamine system, specifically modulating it.
Okay.
Instead of just boosting or blocking like dopamine receptors, for instance, or blocking enzymes that would, break down dopamine and things like that, and having a direct impact, on the output of the dopamine receptors, pushing it, positive or negative, it has a modulatory effect and seems to act as a normalizer for dopamine.
That's so cool.
Restoring things back to their normal state. And that's not just on the dopamine system that it does this. It does this on the body system too. Like it helps restore things back to their normal working state. But specifically, this effect has been noticed and noted in their dopamine studies. Wow. And it helps counteract a lot of problems when your dopamine levels are too high consistently or too low consistently. Which is a complex and interesting effect that is rarely seen in most of our known compounds. There's not very many of them that have that sort of restorative and modulatory effect on your neurotransmitter, specifically your dopamine system, in that it kind of restores it back to the way it should be.
This really speaks to how like the peptide is so profound because of its distributed mechanisms that all have the same effect on different mechanisms within the body and the brain, which is just so interesting. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And would also potentially have, this specifically would also potentially have implications for things such as overamphetamine use, methamphetamine recovery, like other stimulant type recoveries that happen, or issues that arise from overuse, as well as potential, treatment even for things like ADD that is known to result from an imbalanced like dopamine system.
I wonder if there could be some implications for addiction recovery if it's a normalizer when it gets back to its proper state. That seems to be implicated for addiction potentially.
Well, for things that are based in mechanisms that it can affect, I would say probably
Yeah.
like dopamine, for instance. If something is primary mechanism is through the dopamine system, or the reward system, I can see BBC helping with that,
For sure.
but now a couple of the other areas that the studies have kind of shown it can assist in that are kind of unusual too, is specifically in peripheral nerve regeneration. There's some pretty strong evidence that it can help damaged peripheral nerves grow and recover their function, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And some one of the interesting things about it, and they've done a lot of studies both on rats and dogs on this. So their animal studies are kind of split between both rats and dogs. And I think if I remember correctly, they were beagles and I can't remember what the other one was.
Yeah.
But there's another breed of dog. But it's what's interesting is that its half-life, BPC's half-life, is super short. It's 30 minutes. That is insanely short.
Yeah.
For a compound, especially one that has this much of an effect. The effects last way longer. So its effect on your system is enormous, but it only stays in your system for a very short period
The
of time.
active compound is around 30 minutes, but the cascading effects is 24 hours or more.
Right.
Wow.
Isn't that nutty?
It is a little nutty. That's for sure. Yeah. Wow.
So with that said, and there being a lot of potential benefits, but also and like animal research to suggest those benefits, like a good amount of data to work with, we would think that there would be human studies that would be happening, and that there'd be also a lot of human data because people would be getting excited. Is that not the case?
Yeah, that's kind of a factor that really is interesting. It's like almost all of what we're talking about that is so exciting is all from animal studies. We really don't know how these pretty incredible effects from the animal results will actually translate to human bodies and diseases. And so there are some anecdotal reports of people using it, and there have been some small pilot studies, but they're really not sufficient or validated by the actual scientific standards for drugs. And so they lack kind of the necessary rigor that control groups and blinding studies have. And, human studies have even been canceled or stopped without.
Wait. So there are actual studies that have been started on BPC-157 and then canceled?
Yeah. So they have been stopped without publishing any of the results. So we kind of don't even have what they found in those small clinical studies. They pretty much just canceled the research and said, all right, we're just going to forget about this. It's not available to the public.
And they didn't really say why.
Really didn't say why. And it's really sad that that is the case because of this incredible healing property that it has on such a wide scale. I mean, you could go into theories about the actual profit incentive for the pharmaceutical companies overall
Well, I'm sure
because of
that
its
that
encompassing
is
effects.
I'm sure that's a logical conclusion to come to as to the reasoning behind any study that is done or isn't done. For a pharmaceutical company,
Yeah.
their main motivator would be, is this paying for this study, which is going to cost a buttload of money,
Millions.
is that going to be worth it for us in the long term? Do we see enough evidence both going in and during the trial to continue to suggest this is going to be worth it for us?
Yeah.
And I could see instances where something seemed generally beneficial, but not super beneficial at any specific thing they were trying to find a drug for.
Yeah.
Where that would be something that
Hmm.
wouldn't be worth developing, because they, how would they then really market it for a condition, you know?
Exactly, because they're not like a general health clinic. It's different for a pharmaceutical company
Exactly.
that's trying to target specific pathways
Right.
and systems.
And that's part of another indicator of one of the flaws in our medical system.
That's for sure.
Is the targeting of not necessarily symptoms, but like the targeting of creating drugs for problems specifically, rather than creating drugs for healing and preventing of problems.
Yeah.
And the money oriented nature of our system, and as a result, the pharmaceutical industry, which, you know, kind of developed as a product of the system, results in a very self-minded, self-oriented, you know, focus of, if something's not beneficial for me financially and primarily, then it's not worth developing for you.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you consider all of the legal, like blockages, like roadblocks that that they have to deal with, and all of the cost of you know, the different things that go into each of these studies, and adding up all that together, and you now have something that you now have a situation where these compounds, like the ones that we see with the race TAMs and with the BPC, these are all end up getting stuck in the research phase because they're not really good at fixing one specific problem.
Yeah.
They're just good.
Yeah, they're just good for general applications. Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of led to obvious, this drug is not approved by the FDA or any other major regulators, and it can't be legally marketed as a drug or a dietary supplement. Same with the race TAMs, which is really sad, and can only be sold under like very rigorous oversight for research purposes only.
Right. Not for human consumption.
Not for human consumption, even though I might consume it. I'm not a human, though. I'm an alien, I promise.
I eat things that aren't intended to be eaten. Why shouldn't I drink things that aren't intended to be drunk?
Exactly. Yeah. And I know I actually have seen some gym influencers that I follow take BPC-157 because of its regenerative effects. and they've noticed that it works fairly well
Yeah.
for muscle recovery.
Well, one thing to note is that it is one of the banned or prohibited substances listed by WADA.
Yeah. So if you're a professional athlete, you really
Yeah.
can't take it.
And I'd imagine that has to do with the fact that it increases recovery time, muscle repair time, and also growth hormone levels. You know?
Yeah. That's also a pretty major factor as well.
And so, the reality is, we have a kind of an idea of its safety profile. Like it's considered one of the more safer peptides that are in the research chemical class, but we don't know it for 100% sure because we haven't had the extensive human trials that our modern system likes to use as the verification for that status. And so, with that, kind of, if we wanted to get it there, what we would need to do is we would need to have like some more rigorous human trials with actual results published that follow from beginning to end. They need to be fairly large, and they would need to be pretty transparent, as well as have all of the modern mechanisms that we employ to eliminate error, such as double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. And so it's not at the phase where, according to modern standards, medicine standards, it is considered safe for human consumption. But as far as research chemical compounds go, and the amount of research that has been done on it, and the potential risk involved that has been demonstrated so far, as far as side effects and negative interactions that we've seen with body, it's pretty safe compound.
And it's actually implicated that some of the side effects might actually be more so about the purity of the unregulated products that are being got by people who take it.
That's true.
Anecdotally,
that's another thing that I've noticed. A lot of times people don't seem to consider when they're posting their opinions on a substance, especially anecdotally.
No one talks about the actual purity.
Nobody talks about not nobody, that's a generalized statement. Very rarely do I see people talking about the fact that their source might be the problem. And that mentioning that as one of the factors, as well as their own expectations for the supplement going into it, their own body chemistry and metabolism, as well as the anything else that they were taking as well that could interact with that thing's effectiveness. And so all that to say that it's important to remember there are factors that can affect its effectiveness beyond just the compound itself.
Exactly.
And its interaction with your body.
So test the purity, look at your sources.
Make sure the source has reliable third-party testing if you're going to get it. You want them to be posting the results of their third-party testing on their batches with batch numbers and all that kind of stuff, so that you can verify that the stuff that you're getting is always being tested, and also know just the purity of, in general, like, okay, you got this batch that didn't seem as effective and was only at this percent purity, but this other one that did seem more effective was okay, that might be why, because it was a higher purity
of the
things like that. So and you also want to avoid unhealthy stuff in your residues in your your chemicals, so with like heavy metals and other stuff. So that's just good in general to make sure they're having
Yeah.
third party testing.
So yeah, the number one priority right now when it comes to the data of BPC-157 is it needs rigorous human clinical trials, just to know more about how it interacts with human physiology. And we need well-designed placebo-controlled trials to prove that it's safe and works for specific conditions. In humans, if we can find a particular specificity that it's really good at working with, we might be able to convince a particular pharmaceutical company that this is something actually worth investing in. So more research needs to be done in that way. And we need to figure out, the best doses, how to give it, for how long, and understanding the pharmacokinetics and how the human body absorbs, distributes, and metabolizes this particular drug. And if short-term trials are promising, then I think some long-term trials will be instated and pursued, which could be interesting. But yeah, that's BPC-157. Incredible
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's
I mean, to
so
be honest, it's
interesting.
one of those that's like very alluring to me as almost a daily supplement. Like, it'd be one of those that I would be willing to risk. And if it goes well, and it seems to be helping with things, be willing to add it to at least maybe a yearly cycle.
Well, what's particularly interesting is that I've noticed with lots of compounds is that the issue with them is actually the breakdown and the enzymatic breakdown of the compound, and the fact that it's not. And so the fact that this has such quick breakdown with such long-term effects suggests that this actually might yield really positive results, in my opinion, what I've noticed. So it's definitely something to consider at your own risk, but at the same time, let's try to get this stuff
it's always a cost benefit weight ratio that we consider. There is not talking about cost as in the price of it. I'm talking, well, that's relevant because it can be expensive, but the cost as in what is your reason for wanting it, and then what is the risk in taking it, and is that ratio worth it? Like, so if somebody was dealing with organ failures and something that was already going wrong and was getting worse, that's or a system that was really struggling to repair, like, I can see those as being sufficient enough reason for that. But if you're just in general pretty healthy individual already, maybe not worth risking.
Maybe not, but I mean, to some degree, it allows. Well, what's interesting is like mild stressors, like during workouts or running, different things of that nature, provide and facilitate a lot of these natural, either neuroplastic effects or body healing processes throughout the body and the fascia system. So if you were to take something like BPC-157, you could even start to up the stress of environments if you're a healthy adult, while still maintaining a really good healing process within the body. So you could potentially, with the help of BPC-157, stay healthy for a lot longer, and by being able to put more stress on your body and facilitating more exceptional growth all around. So that's something that I'm considering about this, in conjunction with other like longevity supplements. It's just interesting. It's very interesting. This is like, if there was one peptide that I wish could have more research right now that's coming out, it would be this one, because oh my goodness, I mean, just the exceptional results from the animal studies just suggest that it's really good.
And the really multifaceted approach, and the fact that it has so many different systems means that its potential is scaled for like the research that is being done. It's scaled so much further, like one human research study could yield so much information.
Yes. I'm curious about the gut interactions, like the human gut interactions.
And I think that might be what pharmaceutical companies are worried about, is the fact that one human study could yield a lot of different avenues to pursue, and as a result, something that is hard to actually narrow down to something specific.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
it's
of all
like
the
if
noise there.
it brings up a lot of different things and potential areas that could be applicable. Where do we research? You know, where do we focus our research?
And if they're taking other drugs, it could facilitate the amount of regenerative effects needed for them to stop taking the other drugs.
Huh? What?
Yeah, potentially.
I'm not following what you just said.
Oh, sorry, I did say that in kind of a roundabout way, where if you take BPC-157, it has all of these incredible effects that are everywhere. It could, if they're on multiple types of drugs, it could facilitate them stopping other drugs.
Oh, are you saying by
Yeah.
making people healthier, we're making them less likely to take our other drugs? Yes. I can see that.
Yeah. Need that profit incentive. We'll find it for them. Don't worry.
Yep.
Maybe anecdotally we can like think about our experience with BPC-157 and be like, okay, this particular part really was accentuated. And so maybe we can bring that to them and be like, guys, please give us millions of dollars to do a clinical study. That's all we need. Just a couple mil. It'll be fine.
Nothing big.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, we are going to take a break there, and we will be back with the LSTM cell conversation. Gonna break this down, try to make it super easy,
super awesome,
and super sexy,
super hot,
and
beautiful.
We will see you guys then.
Curvy.
2, 1.
And we're back.
All right.
We're
We are
back.
back.
We are back with part 2. This is where we are going to be going over
LSTM
LSTM cells
cells.
again. Specifically, we are going to be going over
Forget gates.
the gates in the LSTM cells. And these are important because they're an important part of how an LSTM remembers.
It needs to remember and retain information. Wants to do anything practical.
Exactly. So it's specifically the gates are part of the short-term memory process. So we have an analysis. Those anyone that doesn't know for long short memory, and it combines both long-term and short-term memory concepts within it, and
short-term memory components are created every single are modified multiple times during every single loop, and are generally quite different. Like they're subject to a lot more change. Long-term memory is something that is selectively modified only a couple times throughout the loop, and then usually takes the different parts of the conclusions that short-term memory has come to, decides what to integrate into the long-term and keep around for the next cycle.
Yeah.
So there is a lot to unpack, but I'm going to try and break things down, make them pretty simple. What we're going to do is, you can see once actually they can't see yet. I have to
pull it up.
Hide or unhide rather my shot.
I'm not throwing away my shot. No, I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm just in my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry.
Huh. Bye. Oh, I think I know what I need to do.
He's got it.
I think I got it figured out.
I got it. I got it. I totally got it. I'm listening.
Maybe we'll see.
We shall see.
Uh,
A little bit of that. And then Do-do-do.
Okay, this is weird. Why isn't should be able to share and replace my video feed? Oh, there we go.
Got it?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. I had to figure out how to replace my camera with the screen share feed so that you guys could see what I was referring to. Okie dokie. So, let me show this on the stream. Okay. All right, you want to check real fast on the stream that we can actually see?
It's on the screen.
Perfect. Okay. So for those that don't remember, zoom out here a little bit.
And there are two different types of multiplication are commonly used in machine learning. And you think two different types of multiplication, Ryan, I went through math. There's only one type of multiplication. Second here, gotta figure out one is actually okay. Stop sharing. Did that get rid of it, or wait? What? What just happened? Oh, it's matrix multiplication screen. Yeah. Alrighty.
Nope. Give me a second. Okay. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, I can see that. That's yep, you're good to go. Solid.
Okie dokes. So there are two different types of. I'll wait till you finish texting. There are two different types of multiplication, and that might seem weird given that you only learned one type of multiplication growing up, but it actually isn't a different type of multiplication for single numbers, or as we call them in machine learning, scalars or scalars, but they're not multiplication for single numbers, they're multiplication for multiple numbers. And so they're basically multiplication patterns and methodologies for multiple numbers. So if we were to define a matrix, which keep in mind, these a lot of what is how numbers are handled in machine learning is via a matrix or tensors, basically lists of ordered numbers of a set size, you know. So let's take a matrix. We'll say we have matrix A that is, for the sake of simplicity, we will say we'll keep these both as 2 by 3 and the other one 3 by 2. Now we're going to generate this to see what this looks like. Okay. Okay. So that's what that looks like. When you have a matrix of shape 2 by 3, that means that it has 2 rows and 3 columns. Whenever you have a matrix of shape, can you see it?
No.
No?
But yeah, it's still at the top.
What do you mean it's still at the top?
Like if you look at it, it's just like it's sort of just the matrix multiplication visual.
You don't see the matrix themselves?
Yeah, it's still like on the desk.
Oh, that means it's frozen. Okay. Give me a second. Fix it. I will fix it for you. I will fix it. Was that?
Yeah, that's fixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So That's what that means. If we have a matrix that is size 2 by 3, that just means that it has 2 rows and 3 columns. If it's 3 by 2, it means it has 3 rows, 2 columns. And an important note with matrix multiplication is matrix B always needs to have the same amount of rows as matrix A, right? Like those second dimensions can be different. You know, they can be however, like I could do, for instance, let's do this to show you how this works. I can do a matrix, give matrix A 5 rows, but it still has to have 3. They have to have the same number, or sorry, they have to have the same number, an overlapping number. And so basically, with matrix A having 5 rows, that means that its columns are going to be the 3, you know, and then matrix B with 3 rows and can have 2 columns.
Yeah.
Right? Makes sense?
Makes sense so far.
Okay. So, and that's ignoring matrix C here because we're going to see how that plays out. But just remember that the number of columns in matrix A is associated with the rows of matrix B, not columns to columns, it's columns to rows. So that they're going to be kind of like the inverse almost of each other. It's provided that they have the same size. However, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to set this back to 2 so that we can kind of have similar sizes here to work with. Now, let's take a look at how matrix multiplication works, because what matrix multiplication does is basically it's going to take each element in a row and multiply it by each element within the other row, within the other one's row. And it's going to do that for each row in the other one, or each column in the other one, right? So let's check that out to see a clearer visual example of how that looks. Boom. So you see, you go through each one and you multiply it by each component, each column in B, calculating the result. Then you take the next element in the same row, multiply it by each component in the column, and the next one. And we use those to calculate the end result. So we'll play it again just to make sure that we understand it. Calculated by the columns. Store the result. Now move on to the next row. Calculated by the columns. Store the result. Calculated by the next column. Store the result. Okay?
Yeah.
That's matrix multiplication. That is how more often than not, that is what multiplication looks like in machine learning.
I've looked at matrix multiplication before, but this visualization does such an intuitive job at understanding the concept. That's really beautiful.
It's the same thing that you see when you see those neuron representations of networks of fully connected layers, where one component is connected to every other component in the next layer. But the problem is it doesn't really show you, first of all, what the practicality of what that looks like, and then second, what that looks like for more dimensions. You know, like it only shows you kind of a limited view of those connections, not how those actually kind of play out in machine learning. And so if we were to change, let's do this just for fun, so we can see this play out. Let's give these different dimensions. Oops, I forgot I put that restriction there because of sizing. Okay. So now we have matrix A that has a size of 2 rows, and it's going to have 5 columns, which means that matrix B has to have 5 rows, right? And we can set any size for the columns. So we set 4. So 4 columns, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Okay. Can you see the mouse in there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now, same thing is going to play out there. Boom, we take the row, multiply it by the columns. Do that for each one. So calculate the result for each column. One times 3 plus 4 plus 0. And an important note here. Is that so this is just an alternate view that's more kind of similar to the traditional view that that you see of machine learning networks. So as you can see here, we have the multiplication going on, the same multiplication. Example here is given in floating point numbers. So decimal point numbers, which is how we usually see them in machine learning. And so you have, I wanted to visualize it more like the biological neuron, so we could draw a connection between how that draw a connection, but between kind of the similarities there. But this is essentially kind of the same concept as what you have going on here. In neuron, we'll say A, with a weight of 0.776, we get the multiplications going on, but for every other neuron in the next layer. So that means 0.676 times 0.53, because that's the weight for that neuron connection. 0. I think I have there's something blocking out the actual number because I don't think that's the right. Calculation. Oh yeah.
Let us go full screen. So I'm going to use the same 2x3 they're doing before to kind of give us a similar state to see the differences. And basically you have matrix multiplication, which is your dot multiplication. And you have your element-wise multiplication, which is your MARD product multiplication. Okay. And I know a lot of words to throw around, but just know the big ones that are easy to remember for these that kind of define what they are: matrix multiplication versus element multiplication. All right. And the distinction is almost even self-evident in the name. You have matrix A, where each
element in matrix A is multiplied by a corresponding element in matrix B. So if we watch this play out, boom, you can see it is truly element-wise.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Why it's simpler to digest.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And the one thing to note here is that while matrix multiplication can have differing numbers, differing shapes for the rows and columns of the matrices, which is part of the attractiveness of matrix multiplication, and why it's one of the things that's more often used. Element-wise multiplication cannot have different sizes. It has to have the same size. And so that gives a very linear approach to multiplication. It's very useful in some scenarios. Right, where that linear combination is needed. But in modern machine learning, we do a lot of nonlinear network design. And so we don't want to keep things the same shape.
Yeah.
Does that all kind of make sense?
That makes complete sense.
Perfect. All right. So with that said, we're now going to move on to the LSTM gates. Actually, no. Not yet. There's a couple other concepts.
Sweet.
And these are really easy to understand. Like I'm really happy with the animations that I created for them, because the really do help you digest what these are that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is the sigmoid function.
Ooh.
Okay. So sigmoid function is an active part of the class of activation functions in machine learning. And one of the weird things about activation functions is that you'd think by the name and the way that biological neurons work that they would work somewhat like a threshold activator, so to speak, where if it's above a certain level, let's signal through, if it's below it. And while it can play a part in that kind of a mechanism, that's not really what it does. It's like essentially kind of acts like signal transformation and signal scaling.
Okay.
So it will either transform something to like numbers to a specific range, like a known range, or might be used to help scale or encourage numbers to be within specific parts of that range. So we'll take a look at what that kind of looks like with sigmoid. So basically, what the sigmoid function does is it maps any value, no matter what the value is, it maps it between 0 and 1. Okay. So what that means and how that looks practically is, it means the larger the number, the closer it is to 1, to the point where it basically is indistinguishable from from other larger numbers, which means that if you're dealing with data that has really large number ranges as inputs, like sigmoid may not work for you at all. You know, and because of that squashing and the loss of data that happens at large numbers. See, so watch this. Watch. I'm going to take right now our input 0, and we're flatly at 0.5. So that's what that translates to in the sigmoid function is a 0. The middle ground is 0.5. So if we change our input and raise it above 0, so now we have 1.4 that's being input into the sigmoid, we get an output of 0.8. So we see very quickly that it approaches that 1 limit, right? Now, as we increase it further, as we increase the value, we see its change that's happening is less and less and less until you can barely notice it moving, right? Right. And so as we approach 10 as the input, like there is almost nothing distinguishable, you know, happening there. Same thing in reverse. If we go below 0, and as we approach 10, less and less movement happens. Yeah. That's what the sigmoid function does. So you can see it has potential benefits and uses, as you might imagine, like scaling numbers in a predictable range, and making sure things are contained, the numbers don't get too large. Yeah. So there's uses for the sigmoid function, but it doesn't apply to everything. And here, if we scroll down, we're going to watch how this actually looks like on a graph format and why it's called, why it's, you know, the way that it's explained is having an S curve to it. So we're going to follow the point. As we raise it, we can see that it gets closer and closer. As it gets closer and closer to the top, it starts flattening out. And so the change that happens there is less and less and less, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Same thing in the reverse. Looks like there's no change at all. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So anytime that you see this symbol right here, this symbol, that's usually in machine learning, that's referring to the sigmoid function. Not always, but usually that's the really frustrating thing about calculus is that we don't always mean the same thing all the time. Context. Right. Squiggle. Exactly. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and go over the ton function since we just went over the sigmoid. It'll help kind of really be easy to grasp both of them at the same time rather than separately. But just be aware that the ton function does play a role in the LSTM gate. However, it's in a section that we're not going to go over today. It's in the section we're going to go over next time. Okay. And so this is kind of like almost like half of the important processes to go over. Mm-hmm. So let's go replace camera with the ton function. This is again, for those that don't remember or that weren't here last time, the ton function stands for the tangent hyperbolic function. Yes. And so, okay. Again, this looks really confusing for people. You know, when you see the algorithm outlined, it's just like, oh, come on. Like, I have to sit here and think through this, you know, but it's very simple in concept. It does the same thing as the sigmoid function, but it moves its middle ground to no longer be 0.5 or it moves its neutral position to no longer be 0.5 like the sigmoid, but instead be 1 and scale the values in between -1 and 1. And so we have the same S curve that we do with the sigmoid, where we see less value changing the closer that we get, you know, the higher our number gets, and then more value the closer that we are to that median point, right? So you can see a lot of wiggle happening there with the rotation around that median. So yes, and I'll do that in a second. Oh, sorry, and I also forgot to full screen this so that we can see more of it. Okay, so yeah, as we can see, around that 0 point, we've got a lot of movement. And then closer we get to the top, less movement. All right. So we'll watch the curve. As you can see, as we come up closer to 0 here, we've got a lot more movement on the y-axis, going up faster and faster. But then as we get up higher and higher, that value increases more and more. It starts leveling out on the x-axis, right? And then this is now our middle. So right dead center in the dead center of town, 0.0 is, you know, our middle point. And that is very useful on a lot of different levels, because and a lot of times in machine learning, we want dealing with things on a negative and versus positive scale is useful, because we can signify, you know, everything from you know, something's importance to the, you know, value that it brings within the data, and to signaling like different categories of things. You know, like there's a lot of different this or that's, and having 0 as that middle point just makes things like not only a lot more clear, but also out as a lot more potential values that can be stored within that range. Because now, instead of dealing with 0.5 to 1 and 0.5 to 0, you're dealing with 0 to 1 and 0 to -1. So you have a lot more of a value range that you can store there without dramatically increasing your memory footprint. Now, what do I mean by that?
So
like,
that's why you don't have it where it's like -2, +2, and so on and so on. We get to like -100, like 100,000.
Yeah, well, we often want to limit the scale of our values, because you can end up with situations like exploding gradients or vanishing gradients if you don't take steps towards controlling the large maximums or minimums, you know. And so that's kind of like part of the effort there is control those values, make sure they don't get out of control. And forgot my train of thought of where I was going a second ago with that. Oh yeah, the memory footprint. The larger your floating point numbers get, which means that more detail you store in there. So 0.457911322222200, like, you know, like the larger that you get behind the decimal point, the more memory that each of those points takes up in the system. And they all have to be the same size, which means if one of them is big, then has a lot of information, then the rest of them have to have like the same amount of information allocation. And so there, if we were trying to squash numbers between only 0 and 1 rather than -1 and 1, we would have half as much room to be able to store information without expanding that floating point decimal, and adding more information onto it. So I don't know if that particular part of it made much sense, but that is the reason why oftentimes like that can also be another benefit to controlling those ranges, because numbers that scale too far out of control, can often increase the computational power and memory footprint.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Okay, so with that covered, you're ready to finally fully understand the forget gate. The forget gate. So what this does, the forget gate's job, as you might expect, is to decide what to forget. And we will see actually, I want to go back to the, just to quickly remember what things are. Going to show our LSTM cell visualization again. Okay. So remember, input, or in the algorithm, what is noted as x of t, is the current input at time now, like the current time. Okay. So that means a feature set, like usually some sort of sample that happened, a time frame sample that happened. Now our previous hidden state, if you remember from last time, our hidden state is our short-term memory. It's like the thing that gets updated, like quite frequently throughout the LSTM cell calculation, and eventually we figure out what from that short-term memory needs to be stored into the long-term memory, right? The long-term memory is the C of t, right? So H of t, short-term memory, X of t is our input, C of t is our long-term memory. And as you can see, we do have the ton function playing out here later on, right? And we also have the ton function playing out. I thought it was, maybe that is where it plays. Oh yeah, the candidate. There we go. And then we have the sigmoid function playing out here with the gates.
So you kind of see how both sigmoid and
right, and we'll cover kind of how those play out in the gates. The sigmoid functions are specific to the gates. So the sigmoid functions are used for the gates. The ton function is used for the cell states that are calculations that happen. So let me switch screens real fast to our, actually, let me stop streaming this one real fast. I don't run into the same issue that I ran into last time. Okay, here we go. Wait a second. Okay, yeah, that's it.
and that is the result get, which here is 0.40. Now, step 2 is the hidden state version of that same calculation. It's just for the short-term memory instead of the input. So the short-term memory gets multiplied by the weights for the short-term memory. Results in this case were exemplified with 0.42. Now we take, or let's go into this real fast. Basically, we results from our matrixication with the input added to the results from our matrixication with the hidden state or the short term, and then we add a bias on. So those get added together, and
summation in this case we're representing as 0.72. Now for the last step, we take the result from that summation, pass that to the sigmoid function that we talked about earlier, and we scale that according to the sigmoid function, and that value gets output in this case as 0.673. And that is the essence of gates. Now, imagine this happening at a matrix multiplication level, where you have, for every single input, you have, so imagine like, one line. Well, for the sake of simplicity, we'll imagine like one line of inputs. So one column, or sorry, one row, 5 columns. Those are our features, right? So imagine each one of those features within being multiplied, right, by the elements in, or the column rows, my bad, the rows in matrix B. And then you move on to the next one. Next one. That operation is happening here for each one of the inputs. And those multiplications are essentially the same, but they just result in a more comprehensive structure and output for the calculation that's happening here. So just more non-linearity kind of, so that it's not so linear as far as input just multiplied by weight, So another thing to note too, just real fast, is that the size of the short-term memory is something that we often decide as what we want it to be.
That's super fast.
Right. So that is something that we as humans, and we can have automation processes where we can run tests and figure that stuff out. But generally that needs to be something that we decide on, is what is the hidden state size for this network, and that is defining the size of the short-term memory that you want to, how much information you want to be allowed to be stored in the short-term memory. And that information then gets used to update the long-term memory. But that's actually a good segue to the last thing that we're going to go over here. And that is the update that happens to the previous long-term memory as a result of the forget gate. Go to, and I realize I'm going like pretty in depth into this stuff, and while it's understandable, like it is a lot to like kind of grasp and comprehend, but there's no way to really make this accurate and understandable for people as far as the internal functionality without going into like this level of detail. And I think it's fun to know how this stuff works. And so, you know, okay, so let's go to this next one, which is cell state. Okay. So remember again, the C1 was representative of the long-term memory C of T was representative of the long-term memory at the current time. C of T minus 1 is previous. Exactly. So basically what we're dealing with here, the part of the algorithm that we're dealing with here is the forget gates output. So what we just previously saw with that forget gate calculation, take the input, we take the short-term memory, we multiply them by their matrices, we add those together with a bias, we get sigmoid of the wrapped output, right? Okay, so what we're dealing with here is the output from that gate, and then we are dealing with the element-wise multiplication with the long-term memory. Okay, so you remember when we talked about the between matrix multiplication and element-wise multiplication? Yep. Here we're dealing with element-wise multiplication. So we will go ahead and create here. We'll see that the element-wise multiplication play out again. (0.54 times 1). So what is that doing exactly? That is telling us which portions of the long-term memory need to remain unchanged or need to be forgotten. Like it's telling us like how, okay, you know, if something is 1, you know, it's not going to be changed at all in the long-term memory. If it has, if it's a decimal number, any sort of like anything less than 1, so to speak, actually really anything less than 1, and it is going to lessen that amount in the long-term memory, or that part of the long-term memory. So it degrades it over time, kind of. That's what the forget gate's purpose is to decide what they're probably we can start getting rid of, and how much it needs to be gotten rid of. So again, forget output from the forget gate gets multiplied by, and that's why the some of those shapes are controlled internally by the forget gate, because it has to create something that matches with the cell state or with the long-term memory, so that it can do that element-wise multiplication. Because remember, I said they have to be exactly the same. So that means there is a part of that last layer of that matrix multiplication, that size that we can decide on, you know, the right-hand side. That means that's something that the LSTM decides, because it needs to match with the size of the long-term memory. Right. And then we do that multiplication, element-wise multiplication, which reduces some of the values in the long-term memory. And then that's that. Bob's your uncle. You have your forgotten information. And the that is done for all the gates. So this same process happens with all of the different with every single one of the gates. Okay. Just you remember the gates that we have. Let me here. Start when we get to the other. So we have the input gate, we have the forget gate, and we have the output gate, right? It's that same process, and we'll next time we'll cover kind of the differences between what the input gate is designed to do and the types of information that is fed, because it's fed different types of information. Right. Right, exactly. That same gating method that happens there, and the multiplication with the sigmoid, all of that stuff is the same. Exactly the same, nothing new to know there. So the essence of the calculation is the x of t, so the input for the current time multiplied by the weight for the input at the current time in a matrix multiplication manner, plus that same state, the previous long or short-term memory, going through that same matrix multiplication process plus bias. That's the portion of that algorithm. Yeah. And there are several other components that decide how to combine like certain elements. Like the reason I chose the forget gate, bless you, is because its combination with the long-term memory is fairly simple and straightforward. It gets combined directly, like right at the beginning of the cell state, and one of the first calculations to happen. And so but later on there is an input node that determines additional component to the additions that happen to the long-term memory and the ultimate states that get output and whatnot. So there's I wanted to take it bit by bit and kind of show how the gates worked and whatnot. Let that sit and resonate for a bit, before covering a different, the input node and how that plays a part in the whole network. But yeah, we're gonna call that explanation there, because I think that's enough information, and that's kind of exactly.
Yeah, this is like some people would be like, "Wow, that was a lot." But in my opinion, that was like a perfect amount. It's just like
good.
It gives you a really good intuitive understanding of the mechanisms behind LSTMs and how they actually function.
Yeah.
Like it's very procedural, and it makes sense as to why this is needed and how that memory is formed, how it relates to that long-term memory, and making sure that there's no information there that's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Precise.
Yeah, and it's really kind of a beautiful system when it's broken down, the way that it's designed, it determines all of that and is capable of keeping track of those different types of information,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Alrighty. So I guess that will be the end of this episode of ThetaWave.
Sure. Yeah, we can end it there. No free flow section. No time.
It's getting pretty late.
That's all right.
But thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Yes.
This was an incredible episode. 2 topics that I very much enjoyed. Lots of relevance. BPC-157, the healing peptide, and LSTM cells, specifically for gate gates. And that was a really good combination of topics. very intellectually stimulating, if I do say so myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great.
All right, guys. Well, join us again next time. We will. We've already got some exciting topics, planned for the next episode, and I can't wait for us to be able to do these videos a little more frequently, and for us to have time to be able to edit them and cut them up and post them as polished videos, which we just haven't really had time to do. So
next week we've got IDRA 21.
Yes, we're going over IDRA 21, and that is one that is another one that's really similar to the LSTM class. It has some very unique properties though, and we'll be covering that next week, as well as the neuroscience topic.
Yeah, the endocannabinoid system.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the actual endogenous neurotransmitters that are produced, and we're probably going to touch a little bit on cannabis and THC and how those phytocannabinoids interact with the system as well. Give you a good comprehensive understanding of when to use cannabis and when it's relevant and when it can have some detrimental neurodevelopment effects if done too frequently. And then we'll dive a little bit more into LSTM cells.
If we have time, yeah.
If we have time.
We'll cover the last parts of those. If not, we'll move to the next week. But hopefully we'll gradually get started a little sooner and be able to kind of fit more stuff in. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next time.